Hey everyone, happy Friday. Well, it's not technically Friday for me, but it'll be Friday when this video goes up. So this is a new series that I'm trying out. Hopefully it does well, and it's just basically this is the first episode of a little series that I like to call Deadponic Talks, where I just talk about a subject and give my thoughts on things. And there's gonna be gameplay in the background that is most likely just gonna be like Call of Duty campaign or gameplay mostly, just something like that. But this first episode, I wanted to talk about what I consider to be the best Call of Duty games in the series out of however many that they are. And the only rule I have is that it's only games that I've actually played. So I haven't played Black Ops 6, I haven't played the new MW3, and I haven't played like some of the more obscure ones. So I'm sticking to mainline entries here. Now, the main one I wanted to talk about is what I consider to be the Blops trilogy, which is World at War, Black Ops 1, and Black Ops 2. And each one has its fair share of strengths and weaknesses. Now, when we talk about World at War, we often cite it as the better World War II game, which, in my opinion, yes, I agree with that sentiment precisely. It is a very well done and well put together World War II game in terms of authenticity and how it portrays its subject matter. If you need a good example of why it's such a good game and what I'm talking about, I'll link a video to Actman's review of it. But he basically talks about adherence to obscenity and portrayal of evil, basically being unapologetic about the subject matter. And that's something that I can get behind because I like when games do that. I like when games show messed up stuff and they don't throw it in your face. I like when, and also I like the fact that they pay respect to World War II as a whole. And one of the big things that I found unfortunately lacking in Call of Duty World War II was the fact that it felt too safe, in my opinion. Now, one of the other things that I actually really enjoy about World at War is the fact that it is basically the starting point for Black Ops as a whole, because you've got Reznov, you've got Dmitry Petrenko, and you've got basically you're setting the stage for that. And also, this game was basically the catalyst for zombies mode, which I think is really well done, especially with only one map and one map at the time that the game came out. There were later maps that came out, and the map is very I forget what it's called. I think it's called Is it Nocturtoten? I think it's Nocturtoten. But yeah, that map is basically only 3 rooms, and yet it manages to be incredibly terrifying, as well as just the concept of basically, I forget the name of the film, but it was basically, I forget the name of the film, but it was supposed to be like a horror film where a bunch of like a squad of German soldiers, they get attacked by zombies, and then they get turned into zombies, which I think is interesting. I kind of forget I forget the name of the film, but yeah, so that's, and also just for me though, the one major flaw that I find with World at War is I feel sometimes that the game is a little too well done, particularly with the Pacific campaign, because if you've played the game, you'll know that the Japanese enemies, they don't pull their punches. Like, they use real world tactics, which is just very impressive. Like the fact that Treyarch, or whichever company, I forget if it was Treyarch or another company, but the company that developed World at War, I think Treyarch was the one who did Black Ops 1 though. So you can clearly tell that the company that made World at War, they paid attention to they did their homework when it came to history. And that's as somebody who is a massive history buff, I can appreciate that. In fact, that's my biggest compliment to the game as a whole. Okay, so Black Ops One. I don't worry. There's more games that I actually really like. I just want to cover the Blops trilogy before we move on to the other ones. So the biggest strength I find with Black Ops One is how it's set in an era that was never really doesn't get enough appreciation. Like the Cold War itself is something that I can actually appreciate because it was it was very tensely. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of like back and forth with like espionage and sabotage, and I actually appreciate that. And I love the story. In my opinion, Black Ops 1 has the best story because of the way it effectively makes, like, there's a massive twist that if you're paying attention, you'll spot the twist. But the twist at the end is one of the best reveals of any game that I've ever played. And that's saying something because I've played a lot of games. I played a lot of games where they had a major twist, and I'm like, okay, yeah. But this, when I first played it, it was surprisingly a good twist. And my friend and I, Orange, funny enough, we always make the joke, the numbers Mason, what do they mean? And, well, there's that meme, and there's also just, the whole thing with Reznov, what was it, Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner, these men must die. And contrary to popular belief, like Gary Oldman even freely admits that his Russian accent, if you can call it that, is over exaggerated, but it's still quite impressive that he was able to portray a character that you care about. Because I really like Reznov as a character. I actually really like him as a character, in fact. And the twist that he was never... okay, sorry, spoilers. But the major twist that he was never there when he was supposed to be is just so fascinating. And the big reveal that Mason, the main character that you play as for the majority of the game, is brainwashed is just really impressive. It's an impressive piece of storytelling that they can do, and the fact that the game doesn't play, basically goes back to the beginning and plays in relative chronological order until the big twist at the end. Now, if you were to ask me, what do I think the biggest flaw of Black Ops 1 is? Well, for me, the sound design, because the shotgun and the grenade, for specifically the frag grenade, they have the same sound effect, and it can get very agonizing every time you hear that. And I freely admit that. And I think the other major flaw for me would probably have to be there's a mission, like the second to last mission, if I'm not mistaken. It was it's the one on Rebirth Island where everything comes full circle. I don't like the stealth aspect of that because you have to be absolutely perfect. And I don't like that. And then when you play as Hudson, you're basically in a hazmat suit, and if your thing gets breached, well, they deploy the Nova 6 gas, and if your suit gets breached, then that's it, game over. And I don't necessarily hate the mission. It's one of the weaker missions in my opinion. And the other mission that I don't like is the one where you escape from the Viet Cong and you have to commandeer a Soviet helicopter. I never liked the vehicle sections of that game. The only exception is the Blackbird, the Blackbird level where you play as Hudson for a little bit. And I like that it's shaking things up. Now, the other thing that I really like also is I like the zombies mode. I think the maps are really well done, especially with like Kino der Toten and 5. 5 is definitely is a top 5, funny enough, a top 5 map, zombies map, because just to be a fly on the wall during that conversation, because you have President Kennedy, McNamara, Nixon, and Fidel Castro in the same room. That by itself is hilarious. And to be a fly on the wall during that conversation would be just something I would want to do, like go back. If I could time travel, that would be something I would want to see, 100%. And funny enough, Ackman also talks about this in the Black Ops 1 review that he did. It's funny because the game was criticized by, I believe, a Cuban organization because they basically said, well, the U.S. failed to kill Castro in real life, so they basically made a game where they killed Castro in game. But the twist is that it was a body double. Which is just, I mean, that's typical. That's kind of how they skirt around that, which I think is fine. I mean, it's fine. Okay, so the other games that I actually really like is Modern Warfare 2019, because there's a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons is that it goes back to what COD is good at, which is making, a decent story, outstanding levels, and a relative adherence to mature subject matter. Like the idea of effectively, the war on terror. Basically, it's Al-Qatala, or basically Al-Qaeda, and that's the allegory there. And I find it interesting. In fact, there are 2 missions that really stand out to me. One of them is obviously Clean House. In fact, I would argue that's like a top 5 mission. In fact, I think it might be one of the best missions ever made because of how it forces you to slow down and take your time. Because a common thing with COD is that you're basically just doing a running and gunning. But with this mission, with the Clean House mission, is very much you are effectively just, you have to take your time, you have to move slowly, which I find to be really well done. And I find the tension of that to be very well done as well. And that's where I really like that mission. I find it as a really interesting mission. And then there's the other one, which is the Wolf's Den, which has 2 sections, which the first section is basically where you go into the compound, which, funny enough, that mission was effectively, it was based off of the 2011 raid on Bin Laden's compound. I mean, a lot of the elements are there, but obviously they changed it around. In fact, 2019's Modern Warfare actually has a couple missions which are based off of either real events or based off some kind of movie. Like, the one I think about, like the embassy level, is 13 Hours. Decent movie, by the way. I mean, yeah, granted, it's directed by Michael Bay, but the fact that he was able to, the fact that Michael Bay made that movie and it turned out the way it did, it was a relatively good movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was based off a real thing, which is kind of interesting. The embassy mission is based off of that, where you're defending an area for a certain amount of time, and it just gets progressively harder. And then you have, the Wolf's Den, which is basically the 2011 raid, and then the second section is basically, in that mission, is you're basically going through a series of tunnels, which reminds me of the Black Ops 1 mission where you go through the tunnels with I forget the guy. I think it's what they refer to as a tunnel rat, and it gave me that vibe, and I really like that. I also like how claustrophobic it is and how like very close quarters it is, and I can appreciate that. And that's the one mission that I think having a shotgun is a really good thing, and I really appreciate that. I really like that they did that. And of course, it has important story parts, but I'll get to some of the flaws of that in a little bit. And as for other things that I really I like the gun customization. I like the map variety, especially the ones that they brought in, especially with future updates, which I'll get to with flaws. The fact that they brought in Crash, which was a COD 4 map, I believe, and they brought in Rust, is just they were spoiling the fans. Like that's just my opinion, but Rust is a really fun map. I really like Crash. I really like the bridge one. There's a lot of maps that I really like in this game. And that's one of its also its biggest strengths. Now, as for its biggest weaknesses, well, it's a COD game. Obviously, there's going to be hackers, especially on the PC version, but me personally, I don't really care about that. The big one is regarding the story. There's a bit in the game where they are specifically trying to be controversial. I think it's in one of the missions where you're in St. Petersburg and you're trying to capture the Butcher, and you basically take a revolver and you're basically trying to shoot. You basically threaten to shoot. You're threatening to shoot him, and while his family's there. And by the way, I love Nikolai in this too. Nikolai is such a fun character, and I really like him. And for me, it just felt like they were pushing it a little too far. And as Price explains later, sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. At the end of the day, somebody has to make the enemy afraid of the dark. My least favorite mission of that game, by and far, was the one where you play as young Farah. And, going dark is fine. I don't mind going dark, actually. In fact, that was the mission that was basically plastered all over the game's marketing material. And I actually really like that. I like that mission quite a bit because it forces you to take your time. And a thing that I really appreciate about this game is that it forces you to take your time. And that sense of the gunplay is, like, absolutely gorgeous. Like, the game's weapons are some of the most, like, well-crafted, and they clearly took cues from, like, Terran Tactical and the John Wick series when it came to the handling of the guns in terms of animation, and I can appreciate that. So there's that. And anyway, going back to the flaws, one of the things that I really did not like is the mission where you play as a young Farah, because you're playing as a kid and everything is very, like, it's hard to explain without actually having to show the mission, but I can appreciate that they're trying to give Farah specifically a little bit of background and that she's been fighting for most of her life. And, of course, another thing that they do here is they have the stereotypical Russian bad guy because, it's a typical thing with COD. Unless, unless Russia is not actually in the picture. But it's just the fact that also the whole waterboarding thing is just it's something that just kind of makes me squeamish. And it's not something that I like. I don't actively go back to that mission just for that specific section, because once you get free from the cell, you are basically, you're kind of, you're doing a bit of a stealth section, and then you get to the combat section, which has not an annoying section, but just a bit of a difficulty spike. And I actually really like how the game basically shows that Price has been basically supporting Farah and Hadir for ever since he rescued them from Barkov's prison. And I actually really like that. I really like Price in this game. I'm sad to hear, like, I found out that it's not the same voice actor as from the older games, but the actor who voices him does a really good job. And obviously they're going back to basics with this. So obviously they're establishing Task Force 141, which is fine. I have no issue with that. I really enjoy, like, the game overall is really good. In fact, it's got a lot of critical acclaim. But the other major flaw that I find is just that's Modern Warfare 2019 is the game that gave rise to, basically, it created Warzone. Now, I have nothing against Battle Royales, but the fact that COD is going this direction, and they've been shoving a lot of stuff into Warzone, is just, it kind of irks me, to be honest. And for me personally, I don't like Fortnite. I don't like it. In fact, I think it is like, it's one of those games that I actively avoid. I used to play it back in the day, but then I stopped playing it altogether because I just didn't like it. And I appreciate, like, I don't mind a Battle Royale. Like, Apex Legends is a great, like, it's a decent title. But Warzone is kind of just unnecessary, and they've been really pushing that, especially with the latest entries in the franchise. So the next game the other game that I actually really, really enjoy, funny enough, is the original Modern Warfare trilogy. Oh, one more thing about MW in 2019. I don't like Hadir's motivations regarding, like, how basically he was the one who stole the gas. He was the one who basically was like, okay, so essentially he's doing this because as far as it explains, he always wanted to fight without rules. Now he's broken every single one of them. Yeah, and the fact that, like, it's heavily implied that he's the main bad guy from COD 4, that if they ever do continue that storyline, I have a funny feeling that we're going to get the nuke scene again. And Farah is going to have to, at some point, she's going to have to kill her brother. But that may just be me. But the fact that, if they do that, they have to bring in Zakayev, which I will talk about that in another day. But yeah, they would have to bring in Zakayev, and they would have to bring in Makarov. But given what the franchise did with Makarov, it doesn't surprise me that how they went with him. Which, honestly, I'm not going to talk about new MW3 because that's a whole other can of worms. Alright, so the other game that I feel like gets underappreciated is 100%, for me personally, would be probably, it's a toss-up between Infinite Warfare and Advanced Warfare. Because Advanced Warfare has a lot of good ideas. The modern technology, like the future technology, the exosuits, but it is also the game that started the whole loot box thing. So you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. And I freely admit, like, Advanced Warfare is a guilty pleasure. Like, it's a guilty pleasure 100%. There's no getting around that. And that just feels like if you ask people what your favorite COD game or what COD game you frequently replay, if you bring up Advanced Warfare, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you liked that game." Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Advanced Warfare has a lot of flaws. Like, in terms of story, it's bare bones. In terms of gameplay, it's decent. In terms of, like, story and just, the overall, like, sometimes, there are times, like, in some missions where they have it where, like, you have one exo up or exo type, suit type, and then another mission you don't. So, like, for example, the double jump was a big thing regarding Advanced Warfare. And in the campaign, you don't get double jump very often. In fact, you barely get it. In fact, actually, I would say that Advanced Warfare has one of the better vehicle sections. That's just me. And I actually really like the big Goliath suit. That thing is a guilty pleasure for me. It gives me like either like Avatar or Aliens vibes, which I think is really cool. I like Gideon. Gideon is a fun character. I like the concept that a corporation has its own private army and they're developing a WMD, which in and of itself is just horrifying, and it's led by Kevin Spacey. The mission where you're captured is just a really cool mission because you're basically only using one arm, and because your prosthetic arm is damaged. Also, this is the game that spawned the whole press have to pay respects thing, which that's all fine and dandy. I think I think Advanced Warfare is a pretty decent game. And it definitely has its fair share of flaws, but it is a fun game. It's a guilty pleasure game. Now, when you talk about Infinite Warfare, everybody says, "Oh yeah, that's the underappreciated one," because it has the whole thing where COD goes to space. It's like, yeah, eventually they were going to do that. I mean, what do you think they were pushing with Advanced Warfare? And I think of the campaigns that I've played, I think Advanced Warfare is the only, or not Advanced Warfare, Infinite Warfare is the only one I haven't beaten yet. Maybe that's just a me thing, but one of the things that I really like, actually, I like how they take classic maps and they add a bit of a space vibe to it. I actually do like most of the characters. I like the characters a lot, actually. I like Ethan, especially. Ethan is like basically, if I had to describe it, he's basically a combination of HK-47 and C-3PO, but he's a more, how do I say it? He's a more combat oriented version of C-3PO, and that's saying something. The only thing missing is Anthony Daniels doing the oh dear thing, which that's fine. That's all fine and dandy. Like, I don't mind the voice actor for Ethan. As for the whole idea of basically you're a captain, but you go on missions yourself. I really enjoy that. I do like the villain. There's the mission where you're stuck in space and Ethan has to sacrifice himself to save you, to give you oxygen, is a really cool moment. It's a really heartfelt moment too. And the first mission is actually where you're on, I think it's Jupiter, I think it's either Jupiter or Pluto, I forget, but basically it ends where you essentially, the character you play as in the first level, he dies. And yeah, it's kind of brutal, actually. And the villain is, it's Jon Snow meme, but what are you gonna do with that? But it has that. The only thing that really holds it back is maybe the guns are a little. They're too sci-fi, or they split them up between energy and ballistic. I don't mind that actually. I don't mind that, but I think that might be considered a flaw, and I'm not a fan of the concept of. Honestly, the Infinite Warfare is underrated, but I do see flaws. It's just a little hard for me to explain it because just how I am. And I completely forgot Black Ops 2. So, Black Ops 2. Black Ops 2 has a really decent campaign. It was the first to introduce the whole, multiple endings bit. And if you don't do certain side missions, or you don't do, everything, you get basically a bad ending. And Woods, as an old man, he's still, he kind of acts like a gunnery sergeant, but it's still funny. And I think the villain is really well done. I think the villain is really well done. The campaign does have its fair share of flaws, like the Strike Force missions are kind of strange because it's basically an RTS mixed with on the ground, boots on the ground stuff. And then you have, oh god, the multiplayer. The multiplayer is probably the one thing that I remember, this was the multiplayer that actually, I invested in, and I got to, level 50 prestige, and I was very proud of that. In fact, my friends and I, when we played Black Ops 2 back in the day, I had this really stupid build where I would go, make a shotgun build, but I would add a suppressor at the end, and everybody would be like, adding a suppressor on a shotgun is really stupid, but then I would kill them, and then we would play the map Hijack, and after I kill them, I just jump off the boat, because I know they're coming after me. And it was a lot of fun. It was a really fun game. I like the multiplayer. I am not a fan of some of the maps, though. The two maps that I really liked were Hijack, which is the boat level, and Nuketown, because of course you have to have Nuketown. And those are the only two maps that I remember from that game. Everything else is just meh, or I barely remember it. So, and also my biggest complaint about the game is, in fact, the multiplayer itself, in terms of just how back in the day, because this was on the 360 and Xbox chat was a big thing, you had so many people that were spouting derogatory slurs and all that, and you did have a couple 12-year-olds here and there, but it wasn't a. There's a reason why the games are rated M, and it's not because only adults can play them. But that's a topic for another day that I might do. But the multiplayer has its fair share of, I think Black Ops 2 is the game where the no scoping was at its most egregious. But that just may just be me, because man, when I used to play back in the day, when I played with friends, I had one friend who would do nothing but do the quick scoping sniper thing, and it really made me mad. It made a lot of us mad when we played it, and that was the reason why we said, "Hey, you can't quick scope." And also, Black Ops 2 was also the game that basically was the one where you could invite friends over and you could play, and it was a good time. And also, screen peeking was a big thing back in the day. If there's any other flaw that I have to say about the game, it's definitely the zombies. The zombies was not very well done. Transit was just oh my god, transit was not something that anybody wanted. And the fact that Treyarch went that route, although there is Nuketown Zombies, which is kind of interesting. I actually really appreciate that. I actually really like Nuketown Zombies. And for all of its flaws, yeah. But anyway, that's it for now. But stay tuned for more episodes, and I will see you in the next episode. Make sure you guys take care of yourselves. This will be the last episode before I go in for surgery. So keep that in mind. But anyway, guys, take care.